Has it ever happened to you that in the middle of an argument, when you are filled with anger and not sadness, tears appear without you having called them? Why does the body react exactly the opposite of what you want? Why do you cry when you are trying to be firm? And even more unsettling, why do others interpret that moment as weakness? Stay with me, because behind those tears there is no emotional failure, but a profound mechanism that explains much more than you imagine. You are in the middle of an intense argument. You feel your chest heavy, your mind racing, and an urgent need to defend yourself. You aren't sad, you're angry. Every word you say comes from conviction, from the feeling that something important is at stake. However, unexpectedly, your body begins to react in a way you haven't chosen. Your throat tightens, your voice cracks, and tears appear without permission. In that moment, the dynamic of the conflict changes completely. The other person stops listening to your arguments and focuses their attention on your reaction. Their gaze transforms. Sometimes that phrase you dread hearing most even arrives. Why are you crying? It's not that big of a deal. And with those words, shame sets in. You feel exposed, vulnerable, as if you had lost authority just when you needed most to stand your ground. Internally, the conflict multiplies. On one hand, you still feel rage and commitment to what you are saying. On the other, you are fighting your own body, which seems to betray you. A childish feeling appears, as if you had turned into someone you didn't want to be. You wanted to appear strong, confident, adult, but the crying makes you feel small and out of control. Our culture has long associated tears with weakness. We have been taught that crying, especially in a conflict, is a sign of emotional fragility or an inability to handle pressure. That's why when it happens in front of another person, the discomfort isn't just emotional, but also social. You fear being judged, misunderstood, or even manipulated by your own reaction. However, this automatic interpretation doesn't tell the whole story, because what you are experiencing is not simply a lack of self-control. It's not a character flaw or a sign that you are emotionally weak. It is a much more complex experience that deserves to be understood from another perspective. And to reach that understanding, it is first necessary to question the idea that tears in anger signify fragility. What looks like a loss of control is, in reality, the prelude to a deeper explanation of how your emotional involvement works and how your body responds when intensity reaches a critical level. For a long time, the same idea has been repeated. If you cry in an argument, it's because you don't know how to handle pressure, because something in you is weak. But this explanation falls short and doesn't fit what actually happens in these moments. There are people who can stay cold in a conflict not because they are stronger, but because they are emotionally distant. They are only half involved. When you argue, you aren't half in. You are completely inside the situation. You care about what is said, you care about what is decided, and you care about what is at stake. It could be the truth, the relationship, an injustice, or a personal boundary that you feel is being crossed. You don't operate at 50%, you operate at 150, and that difference is crucial to understanding why your body reacts that way. You cry not because you lack emotional capacity, but because you have an excess of involvement, because you are deeply connected to what is happening. Your system isn't shut down, it's running at maximum performance, and when something runs far above its usual level, wear and tear is inevitable. It's not a sign of failure, it's a sign of intensity. Think of an engine designed to run at a constant pace. If that engine starts operating far above its normal capacity for a prolonged period, it will generate heat. A lot of heat. Not because it's defective, but because it's being pushed to the limit. Exactly the same thing happens with your emotional system when you get so deeply involved in a conflict. People who seem calm in an argument are often that way because they don't feel like something essential is at risk. They are emotionally protected by distance. You, on the other hand, are present, involved, and committed. That total dedication is the reason the emotion intensifies to the point of overflowing. Therefore, the idea that crying in anger is a sign of fragility needs to be reconsidered. You aren't losing strength. You are showing how important what is happening is to you. Crying doesn't appear from a lack of control, but as a direct consequence of extreme emotional involvement. And to truly understand this phenomenon, it's necessary to look beyond emotions and observe how the body responds when that intensity reaches a biological limit. To understand what happens in those moments, it's necessary to step away for a moment from psychology and observe the body through biology. The human organism is designed to respond to intensity, not just emotional, but also physical. When a situation demands too much, the body activates automatic mechanisms to prevent a collapse. Imagine a marathon runner in the final stretch of the race. Their muscles are working at the limit, their heart is beating hard, and their body temperature is rising rapidly. If that internal heat isn't released, the system is in danger. That's why the body sweats. Sweat isn't a sign of weakness, it's an intelligent response that cools the organism and allows the runner to keep moving forward. No one looks at an athlete sweating and thinks they are weak. Quite the opposite. We understand they are giving their maximum effort. The crying that appears during anger works in a very similar way. It's a form of release when emotional intensity reaches a critical level. It is, in essence, a kind of emotional sweat. In an important conflict, your nervous system enters a state of high activation. The body prepares to defend itself, to react, to stay alert. The pulse quickens, breathing becomes shallower, and focus narrows. The whole organism functions as if it were in a race at maximum speed. The brain then perceives that the internal load is increasing too much. Tension, focus, passion, and stress accumulate until they approach a breaking point. To prevent the system from overheating, the body activates a regulation mechanism. That mechanism is neither conscious nor voluntary. It happens even when your mind is trying to stand firm. Tears appear as part of that cooling process. They don't arise because you are losing emotional control, but because your organism is trying to reduce overall activation. It is a physiological response designed to protect you when the intensity exceeds what the system can sustain for long. Understanding this completely changes how you interpret that moment. You aren't breaking inside. You aren't failing. Your body is doing exactly what it needs to do to prevent emotional overload from leading you to a collapse. Crying isn't the end of the process. It's a release valve that allows the system to keep functioning. But this response isn't limited just to regulating internal intensity. Behind the tears lies an even deeper layer, an ancient function related to protection and survival in conflict situations. And to understand it, we must observe how the body interprets danger. When a conflict becomes intense, your body doesn't interpret it as a simple, difficult conversation. For the nervous system, that situation activates very old circuits, designed to protect you when survival seems to be at risk. Even though you rationally know you aren't facing physical danger, your organism responds as if you were. At that point, what could be described as an evolutionary bodyguard comes into play. This bodyguard is overprotective and old-fashioned. It doesn't distinguish between an argument with your partner, a disagreement with your boss, or a real threat. To it, any confrontation charged with emotion is potentially dangerous. When it perceives that the intensity is rising too high, it decides to intervene to prevent further damage. Its goal isn't to win the argument, but to keep you safe. This is where the parasympathetic nervous system begins to activate. This system, responsible for rest and recovery, acts as a brake when the body has been in a state of alert for too long. Acetylcholine is released, the heart rate begins to decrease, and overall activation is reduced. Tears are the visible manifestation of this internal cooling process. But crying doesn't just serve an internal function, it also has an external purpose deeply rooted in our biology. Recent research shows that human tears contain chemical signals that influence those around us. Upon seeing or perceiving tears, the other person's testosterone levels may decrease, and brain centers associated with aggression gradually turn off. In simple terms, tears send a silent message to the environment. Lower the intensity, stop the attack, reduce the aggression. It is a de-escalation signal designed to protect you when the body perceives that the confrontation could go too far. It is not a conscious or manipulative strategy. It is an automatic biological reflex that has helped our species survive. That's why when you feel like your body is betraying you in the middle of an argument, it's actually trying to do the opposite. It isn't sabotaging your position or going against you. It is evaluating the situation from a primitive framework and concluding that the best way to protect you is to reduce the threat level, even if that means activating crying. You might feel frustration toward this internal bodyguard. You might think it appears at the worst possible moment, but its intention is clear: to prevent the situation from escalating to a point where you could be hurt, emotionally or psychologically. From its perspective, being right doesn't matter if it involves too high a risk. Understanding this mechanism changes the internal narrative. It's no longer about fighting the body or feeling shame for its response. It's about recognizing that there is a part of you trying to protect you with the tools it knows. However, while this response makes biological sense, it isn't always functional in modern contexts. Therefore, it is important to learn how to handle these moments without losing control or dignity. And for that, it's necessary to understand what happens in your brain just before the tears appear and what tools you have at your disposal to stay present when emotional intensity reaches its peak. When tears are about to appear, there is a crucial detail that often goes unnoticed. In that moment, the most rational part of your brain is no longer in charge. The prefrontal cortex, responsible for logical thought, planning, and self-control, begins to gradually disconnect. Not because you are incapable, but because the body has prioritized survival over reasoning. In high emotional load situations, adrenaline takes control. The organism enters a fast action mode where there is no room for complex reflections. That's why when someone tells you calm down or think calmly, those words don't work. It's not that you don't want to, it's that your brain literally cannot access that state in that instant. For this reason, you don't need to learn many techniques or memorize long lists of strategies. In fact, trying to do so can increase frustration. What really works is choosing a single simple tool and practicing it until it becomes automatic. It's not about becoming someone perfect, but about being someone who has a reliable resource when the intensity begins to rise. One of these tools is called looking up. The moment you feel the tingling in your eyes, slightly tilting your chin and directing your gaze upward, sends a physical signal to the brain. Looking down is associated with introspection and emotion. Looking up activates visual attention and alert systems. This simple gesture can help slow the crying reflex because it communicates to the body that you are still present and in contact with your surroundings. Another effective tool is deliberately activating logical thought. The limbic system, in charge of emotion, and the prefrontal cortex share resources. They function like a seesaw. When one is strongly activated, the other weakens. By forcing yourself to perform a specific mental operation, like repetitive subtraction, you force the brain to redistribute those resources. It's not about distracting yourself, but about shifting activation toward rational areas. There is also a tool that is especially useful when you feel like you are losing control completely: sensory anchoring. Instead of getting caught up in what is happening inside you, you bring your attention to your immediate environment. You consciously observe what you see, what you touch, what you hear, what you smell, and what you taste. This process takes you out of the internal storm and brings you back to the present, where intensity is usually more manageable. These tools don't eliminate the emotion or the importance of the conflict. They aren't designed to make you indifferent. Their function is to help you stay in the situation without the body taking absolute control. They allow you to keep listening, speaking, and participating without the physiological reaction taking over the scene. However, there are moments when the emotional wave is too strong. Despite all attempts, tears appear, and the activation has already passed the point of no return. In those situations, insisting on resisting can make things worse. The most effective thing is not to fight, but to change strategy. When you reach that point, you need a way to momentarily exit the situation without it looking like a flight, without losing your position or your dignity. And for that, there is a simple but powerful pause that uses the body itself to regain balance. A point comes where, no matter how many tools you try to apply, the reaction has already been activated. The tears are falling, the voice is breaking, and the other person notices. In that moment, insisting on maintaining composure at all costs usually makes the situation worse. The body has already made a decision. The smartest thing is not to resist, but to use a strategy that allows you to regain control without losing your position. This is where the strategic pause comes into play. One of the most effective and socially accepted ways to create that space is to ask for a moment to drink water. It is not an escape or a retreat. It is a concrete action that allows you to briefly step away from the intensity without sending the message that you are abandoning the conversation. Saying that you're going to get a glass of water is neutral, understandable, and difficult to question. The effect of this pause is not only psychological, it is deeply physiological. By drinking water slowly, the act of swallowing forces the throat muscles that tighten during crying to relax. That movement interrupts the spasm that causes the broken sound and helps restore a more stable breathing pattern. In just a few seconds, the body begins to reorganize. That brief interval also allows the adrenaline to begin to drop, slightly shaking your hands, breathing more deeply, and giving the nervous system time to exit the state of maximum activation can make a huge difference. You don't need to disappear for a long time. Sometimes a minute is enough to return with a firmer presence, but there are situations where you cannot or do not want to leave the place. The tears are already there, and the other person is looking at you. In that scenario, there is a fundamental rule that completely changes the dynamic. Do not apologize. Apologizing conveys the idea that you have done something wrong, as if your tears were a fault or a mistake. And they are not. Instead of apologizing, the key is to name what is happening and redirect the conversation. Saying clearly that these are tears of frustration and not of sadness prevents the other person from misinterpreting your state. Even more powerful is expressing that you are reacting this way because you care deeply about what is being discussed. With that, you reclaim the narrative and affirm your involvement. This gesture has a huge impact. You are saying implicitly that although your biology is reacting, you are still present, listening, and committed to the conversation. You aren't collapsing. You are going through a physiological response while maintaining your agency. There is a profound dignity in that stance. It's important to understand that this process isn't mastered overnight. There will be arguments where tears appear before you can apply any tool, and that's okay. Punishing yourself for it only adds a second layer of suffering to an already intense situation. Shame doesn't protect you. It only amplifies the discomfort. Your ability to feel with such intensity, to involve yourself to the point of overflowing, is not a flaw. It is the same source as your empathy, your creativity, and your emotional strength. You are a high-performance system that occasionally generates more heat than it can immediately dissipate. Learning to manage that heat doesn't mean turning it off. It means understanding it. The next time tears appear, remember that they are not a sign of weakness. They are proof that you are alive, committed, and deeply human. Even in those moments, you still have the ability to maintain your voice, your truth, and your dignity.